All right, good evening. I will call this April 20th Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. Hope everybody's enjoying that Seattle sunshine out there. Let's start out with roll call. From my left to right, Commissioner Syed Safavian.
Here.
Commissioner Wasim Fayed.
Here.
Commissioner Carrie Bosworth.
Here.
Mike Bresco has an excused absence this evening. I am Mark Boffman, and I'm here. Commissioner John Bachman. Here. And Commissioner Ajay Chakrapani.
I'm here. Thank you.
Great. Next, let's read the meeting accessibility statement.
The public is welcome to attend Planning Commission meetings in person at City Hall, 801 228th Avenue Southeast, or virtually through Zoom. In accordance with the latest public health guidance, masks are recommended but not required for in-person attendance. Public comments. Each person is allowed up to 3 minutes for non-agenda comment, 5 minutes if representing an organization, and 7 minutes for agenda public comment. For those providing comment through Zoom, once you have dialed into the meeting, please virtually raise your hand to indicate you would like to provide public comment. Your mic will remain muted until you are called on during the public comment period. To give public comment via Zoom, join the webinar via the link https://us06web.zom.us/j/828-226-487-94. To give public comment via mobile or landline telephone, dial the following number, US +1 253 215 8782, webinar ID 828-226-487-94#.
All right, thanks, Julian. Next, approval of this evening's agenda. On the agenda, we have a review of the draft greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled reduction strategies. It's probably a cool acronym for that I haven't figured out yet. And then also, we're going to do a public hearing on some development regulations cleanup. So, any comments on the agenda for this evening? Seeing none, we'll call the agenda approved by common consent. Next, we'll do approval of the minutes from the April 6th meeting. Does anybody have any corrections from the April 6th meeting? Carrie?
We need one correction for Mary Wichter's public comment. Something was listed. You guys got that? Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll make sure we get that correction in the documentation. Anything else? Okay, we'll call those meeting minutes approved with that correction. Next is non-agenda public comment, 3 minutes per person. Who do we have for non-agenda public comment? We are delighted to have Mr. Paul Stickney in the room with us.
In the room. Excuse me. Hello to the Planning Commissioners, it's Paul Stickney, Sammamish. I took a course this week from Western Washington University. They have these hour online environmental sessions that are awesome. And it's called Mini Forest Revolution. And it's a way by a gentleman in Japan who just passed away at almost 100 years old a couple years ago. The Miyawaki method to rapidly rewild the world. And that's their term. It's kind of a cool term. Very interesting. They had a good definition of a forest, and this does hang together with the two things on the agenda tonight, but also everything who Sammamish is as a city in the trees. A forest is a biological community dominated by trees. Involves many plants, animals, microorganisms, interact with each other and with the environment as a functional unit. Most of us here know that, but it's a good thing to say. Miyawaki method is very interesting. It works on sites to about half of a hectare. The presenter was in France, and so they use hectares instead of acres, and I had to look on my computer. A hectare is about 2.5 acres, so half of that would be about 1 acre and a quarter. His method is simple, clear, and makes sense. You take a site that needs a forest, 1.5 acres or larger. You use local species that you identify that would have been there had it not been cleared. You create a vegetation structure. So you plan how the trees and the shrubs will start and where it will end. You create loose, living forest soil and create a mulch. And what was interesting was they showed a slide that a natural ecological succession is between 0 to 100 to 200 years. His method has been proven to work from 0 to 15 to 40 years. It's pretty exciting. And with all the advantages that a forest does, which many of us know, but primarily takes carbon out of the air and puts it into the ground and puts oxygen in the air, and that's all good stuff, as well as cooler and water. But I'll close with a couple statements. It's not just about healing nature, it's about it healing us, was part of this presentation. And the last thing is we need to care for the land where we are, and it's a real opportunity to add microforests 1.5 acres at a time. I'll send information to the Parks Department after after I get this slideshow from these guys. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Julian, do you have anybody virtually?
We have one hand raised. Ms. Wichter, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Mary Wichter, Sammamish for 22 years. Hurrah for Paul Stickney. That was a really awesome little presentation on reforestation and revegetation, and I'm super excited to hear his details that I'm sure he'll have later. And we do need to do that in the city. I do know that there are neighborhoods that have a native growth protection easement where they're not allowed to do anything, and blackberries have taken it over with the large trees, and they would love to be able to do something. And I don't know if Urban Forestry Management Plan is coming back super soon, but I think what Paul talked about is super important. I've started doing a little bit of that on my steep slope hill where I live as sort of a demonstration for what can be done. For a non-agenda public comment tonight, first of all, thank you for making the correction. The correction in the minutes was they just wrote TDSs, which isn't a thing. It should be TDRs for transfer of development rights, which I said is one of the key things you need to do with the housing. On the other thing in the housing, we did change the name of the housing action plan to the housing, I forget what it is, it's a diversity toolbox, which I think is really great. And then we talked about bonus parcels, and when I had originally read the document, I was like, what are bonus parcels? And those are the parcels that are either owned by the city or maybe the water district or maybe a private entity like a church or a park and ride or an open space. So they're kind of institutional parcels, but not always. And they're places that maybe could be redeveloped a little bit for use by higher density. And so instead of bonus parcels, we talked about faith-based, I forget what Commissioner Bosworth had said, but I was thinking about it after the meeting and I thought, you know, they're really prime locations, and then there's the prime rate and Amazon Prime. So what they are is they're really primed, P-R-I-M-E-D. They're primed, like when you have a water pump, you prime the pump to get it to go, or you do the same thing with, I believe, your gas and your natural gas. So I think they're primed places. So they're places that, or parcels, maybe primed parcels is the best thing to do. So I wanted to throw that out there because you guys are really good at giving suggestions and talking about things. And that was just one thing I thought about at the end of last meeting. And then the last thing I want to talk about under a minute here is the Sammamish Municipal Code has been around a long time. I think it started right when the city started. And when we did Development Regulations Phase 1 and the formal version of that, and then there was Development Regulations Phase 2 under Ordinance 2021-540. It was adopted in December of 2021. It became effective January 1st of 2022, and that created what we call the SDC, or Sammamish Development Code, and we have the Sammamish Municipal Code, and one didn't replace the other. Parts of them did, and parts of them merged. And it's actually really hard to find the SDC, or Sammamish Development Code, on the city website since it's been updated on February 28th. So I did want to report that to anybody who's in city staff who might know who to talk to about that, because I think some of the links are wrong, and I don't think it would be understandable to an outside person. So thanks for listening to me. Have a great meeting. I'll listen to the end.
Thank you, Ms. Wichter, and we have no more hands raised.
All right. Thanks, Julian. Let's go ahead and get into our topics for this evening. First up is a review of the draft greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled reduction strategies. And I'm sure this is going to be a very short conversation, so here we go. Hi, Erin.
Hello, good evening. Erin Hawking here. I'm representing Brightworks Sustainability. Just pull up my slides. All right. Can you see this okay?
Yeah, we can see it fine.
Okay, great. So as I said, Erin Hawking representing Brightworks Sustainability. I want to review with you all this evening the transportation and energy measures that we have developed for the greenhouse gas and VMT reduction strategy, as well as the climate action plan. So I want to give a little bit of context where we have left off since we all met, the process that has gone into the development of these measures, get into the proposed measures, a little bit of orientation into the categorization and the way we're looking at these measures, the way that they're grouped, timeline and next steps, and then leave a bit of time at the end for Q&A. So our goals for today, today's focus is to provide an overview of the measure development process, provide relevant context, and confirm Planning Commission understanding of the measures. Brightworks will share proposed transportation and energy measures for the City of Sammamish greenhouse gas and VMT strategy and comprehensive plan. Brightworks is not collecting detailed feedback on each measure today. We want to highlight that. We're rather inviting written feedback by Wednesday, April 26th, and we will work with the City of Sammamish to incorporate these comments as we go. We've already received some great comments, some very thoughtful feedback from members of the Planning Commission, so I wanted to say thank you for that, and we've gotten some great feedback already so far. So at the conclusion of the presentation, we would like to hear your questions about the process behind measure development, who was consulted, and how feedback was integrated into the proposed measures, how these proposed measures fit into the overall context of the Climate Program Grant and Climate Action Plan, and any questions around next steps after measures are approved. So jumping into a little bit of context and looking at the measure scopes. Today, presenting measures for transportation and energy. Of course, these are not the only categories that go into a climate action plan or are related to the City of Sammamish and sustainability. These categories are most material for the greenhouse gas emissions and the vehicle miles traveled reduction strategy timeline, and the most technically complex sections of the climate action plan. These measures are critical path items for VMT or vehicle miles traveled reductions, measures related to water, waste, natural environment, and any other category related to sustainability will be presented to the Commission in the second round of review of these measures. And these measures will apply to the CAP more broadly. But again, just want to emphasize that these categories of transportation and energy, that's where we see the greatest makeup of greenhouse gas emissions. So we really want to hone in on those strategies as we're thinking of our approach to ultimately meeting the reduction goals that have been set by the City of Sammamish. So project phases, phase one, baseline analysis, this was the phase that we were in the last time that we all met. So measuring Sammamish's sources of emissions and opportunities for impact, evaluating regional emissions frameworks and goals, so seeing how that fits into K4C, King County, and the surrounding areas. Phase two, measure development, that's what we're wrapping up now. So identifying reduction measures in alignment with K4C commitments that are applicable to Sammamish's emissions makeup, as well as conducting stakeholder engagement and community workshops. You can see that these are running in conjunction with the development of the greenhouse gas vehicle miles traveled grant and the comprehensive plan integration. Phase three, we have the climate action plan development. So development of the climate action report and adopt a public climate action plan based on the feedback of the community, the Planning Commission, and City Council. And at the very bottom there, you can see the City of Sammamish Climate Action Plan being developed throughout these three phases. And we are here in phase 2. So our scope, just want to frame this another way, we have on the left-hand side the smaller bubble of the grant VMT. This addresses transportation and residential energy emissions in line with the Commerce Grant. So this is the reason that these are the primary, another reason that these are the primary focus of the measures we are presenting today. The proposed measures are part of the entire scope of the Climate Action Plan, and some of those will be a part of the VMT grant, depending how they fit into the strategy. And then overall, outside of the grant VMT, we have the larger Climate Action Plan, which we have categorized into city-oriented reduction strategies, so addressing government operations, building, energy, water, waste, and transportation within the city's control, and then community-oriented reduction strategies. That's looking at the bigger emissions footprint within the city of Sammamish. So updated baseline, since we last met in, I believe, January, the baseline has been adjusted slightly. Since January, we have received detailed data from PSE with a breakdown of total electricity and natural gas usage by building type, so split up into commercial and residential buildings. When we met last, we had used an estimated baseline from King County data, so the only change here is to represent true 2019 City of Sammamish energy data. The other exciting development is updated goals. Since we last met, the Sammamish City Council approved the goal of reducing per capita vehicle miles traveled, so VMT per capita, 30% by 2030 and 50% by 2050 as compared to a 2016 baseline. And a second goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions at least 50% by 2030, 75% by 2040, and 96% by 2050 from a 2019 baseline. You'll notice the 96% is 1% higher than the K4C target goals, and that is linked back to the use of a 2019 baseline. So taking a closer look at the process in specifically for the measure development. So starting in January and February, as we discussed, that's when Brightworks and the City of Sammamish began baselining, so measuring the emissions footprint and developing initial measures based on that footprint. So analyzing the baseline and the emissions makeup and starting to realize which measures and strategies would be the most impactful in the city. Within March, we started our process of stakeholder engagement. So just in a few slides, I'll show you the process of the stakeholders we have engaged to date and the type of feedback that we garnered from those groups. Moving into April, we have measure finalization. So that's where we are now, socializing measures with Planning Commission and City Council and incorporating additional edits. Want to point out that we still have May and June in this process for developing, finalizing, and submitting the final measures that will be part of the greenhouse gas VMT reduction strategy and comprehensive plan. So between now and then, we have 2 months of refinement and working of those goals before they are finalized for the grant and comprehensive plan. So just want to give another look at the refinement process from this point and how these measures will continue to evolve. The process of refinement looking forward involves more meeting and revisions, as well as opportunities for feedback from the Planning Commission, City Council, and the Community Advisory Group. Later on in this process, there will be room for minor refinement and additional considerations, including co-benefits and implementation considerations. So just want to show that throughout the dates you see here listed on the screen, these measures will continue to evolve to best fit the City of Sammamish and incorporate all of the great feedback we are getting. So an overview of the stakeholder engagement we have had to date. We have solicited feedback from different city entities as well as related stakeholders. So we have K4C and their consultant, Cascadia Consulting, City of Sammamish Department of Community Development, City of Sammamish Parks, Recreation, and Facilities Department, City of Sammamish Public Works Department, and Sammamish Plateau Water. And you can see on the right-hand side a summary of the key feedback that we received from each of those groups and was incorporated into the language of the measures that we shared with you all prior to this meeting. We wanted to include some responses to some initial comments that we have gotten. I believe 4 comments to date, and we reviewed those as much as we could prior to this call, and just want to address some comments or questions that we got in regards to our overall process of refinement. Comments around asking how these measures would be ranked or reviewed. Wanted to highlight that in alignment with K4C guidance, these measures will be assessed and ranked based on factors including emissions reduction potential, ease of implementation, climate justice and equity, cost savings, and economic recovery and resilience. So measures will be categorized based on impact within the climate action plan, which will have an implementation matrix intended to provide guidance and help the city to prioritize and put measures into action. Again, this round of feedback is intended to account for any gaps or lack of clarity. Future revisions will account for specific language, nuance, co-consideration, and implementation logistics. Just a brief summary of some of the great feedback that we have received today that we wanted to highlight from, I believe, 4 commissioners so far. We welcome this feedback. It's been great. And while you may not see it applied at this point to the measure matrix that you all have, and the sections that we will show on the following slides, we are reviewing this feedback and documenting all feedback, and we'll be considering it, if not now, at subsequent phases in this process, and welcome all feedback and are excited to incorporate it in later phases. So some themes we've seen emerging so far are transportation measures applicability, so ensuring transportation measures are consistent or considering the region at large and potential partnerships, buildings highlighting the need to phase out gas equipment and inefficient systems, community measures, a big emphasis on education and information communication, and then communication and clarification. So elaborating on terms such as partnership and support, and including more details on what's included in specific measures. So all great feedback that we look to incorporate as we continue to refine these measures. So jumping into the specific measures now, we want to give a little bit of an overview of how these measures came to be. What you'll see on the screen, and it's a little bit small, but this is a snip from K4C's Return on Carbon Toolkit, which is a tool provided by K4C and was developed to provide cities with the most impactful measures they can take in each category of reduction, and rank measures to ultimately determine the top most impactful measures and impact areas that will make the necessary emissions reductions to meet that city's goal. So a little hard to see, but you can see the 5 weight categories on the top of this Return on Carbon Toolkit are the same categories that I listed earlier as the ways that we will be evaluating measures through those 5 lenses. So this was the starting point for our measures. We took this comprehensive list that K4C has developed from their experience and research and use this as a starting point to socialize with the different stakeholders that I mentioned. So the outline of the measure matrix layout, we want to make it digestible and easy to understand for all those reading it. So you can think of the matrix as categorized. This categorization was derived from the K4C toolkit that was on the previous slide. We took these actions, socialized, and refined them from there. We left the categorization of community versus government action. We left that categorization as is. These differences, there is some gray area and overlap where certain measures could be viewed as city-specific measures or community measures, and they may resonate with either one, but the categorization will not have a major impact on how it will play out now. We are trying to simplify and group things as much as possible to make it less overwhelming and less of a lump sum of measures. We are working with the community advisory group on the community measures, so just want to note that those are being refined as well. These measures are split into 4 quadrants. You have transportation measures, that's the column on the left-hand side, as well as energy measures on the right-hand side. Those are 2 more main categories of reduction measures because those are our 2 main categories of emissions. And then you can think of the subcategories of city and community broken down within each of those, which is giving us our 4 quadrants of measures that you see on the screen here. So just want to give another overview, baseline again on the right-hand side. So measures grouped into the 2 main categories aligned with the material emissions of transportation and energy. Within each category, we have city measures and community measures, and all measures will be included in the CAP, all meaning city and community. Those relevant to transportation and residential energy will be included in the grant and comprehensive plan. So a bit more information on the categorization of city versus community measures. City measures incorporate actions that the city of Sammamish can undertake to directly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. These measures apply to government operations and actions directly under the control of the city of Sammamish. Community measures include actions that the Sammamish community will need to be involved in to ensure success. These measures incorporate actions that the city can support, but are not directly related to the government operations within the city. So for this next section, we'll be jumping into an overview of the different measures that have been shared with you all and a little bit of a summary of each of those, but want to provide this legend just to give context. So the tables are easy to distinguish. We just have an indication here for a city measure. So again, the city has the ability to implement. Community measure, the bottom left-hand side, city, community advisory group, and community cooperate towards an end goal. On the right-hand side, the car you see there is indicative of a transportation measure, so a measure aims to reduce greenhouse gas from vehicle miles traveled. And on the bottom right-hand side, the plug you see there indicates an energy measure, so a measure intended to reduce greenhouse gases from emissions from natural gas and electricity usage. So starting with city transportation measures, I won't read off each and every measure, but just to give everyone an orientation to the type of measures included and the themes included in each category. So citywide commute reduction programs. The goal of this group of goals is to reduce emissions through commuting through related programs or commute alternatives. So just to name off one, continue allowing eligible employees to telecommute and maintain multiple teleconferencing options for employees and city stakeholders, including virtual options for all meetings by default. So looking at alternatives to commuting to reduce emissions, ultimately through vehicle miles traveled of city staff. Citywide electric vehicle program and advocacy. These are city-specific actions to reduce emissions from transportation through electric vehicle advocacy as well as programs. So advocating for electric vehicle infrastructure in different districts and shuttles throughout the city that the city has control over. Fleet vehicle best practice standards, so any city-specific actions to reduce transportation emissions from fleet vehicles within the operational control of the city. Community transportation measures, so again, measures that the city may start or spearhead, but is ultimately going to work in tandem with the community to achieve and realize those greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Community-wide commute trip reduction. So the goal of this group is to reduce emissions from commutes of those within the community by offering ways to reduce trips through infrastructure or other resources. So again, with the first example, dedicating right-of-way lanes and build bus pullouts for public transit, again, something that is within the city's control, but we'll need to seek participation from the city to actually increase public transit ridership or biking options for transportation. Partnerships and education. These may include public transport services, freight operator partnerships, or other opportunities to educate within the community for different opportunities for efficient transit or alignment with regional goals such as the PSRC Vision 2050 goal. Community-wide electric vehicles and advocacy. So this group of measures is incentives and advocacy. So measures around supporting electric vehicle infrastructure, as well as advocacy for state and regional policies. So even where we see things outside of the city of Sammamish's control and on a bigger scale around regional, county, or state, looking at ways that the city of Sammamish can support those opportunities for electric vehicle advocacy. So city energy measures, this group of measures you see are focused on decisions the city can make within its own operational control. So this relates to City Hall or other office locations that the city controls and operates out of. These actions include efficient equipments, purchasing policies, or energy audits. Low carbon electricity, again, city measures low carbon electricity, including establishing a baseline within those city operated buildings, which is something we are working on currently, as well as enrolling in green power programs offered through Puget Sound Energy. Community energy measures, working with businesses to encourage enrollment in green power programs and developing ways to remove barriers for residential and small business solar installation, energy program strategies, including developing programs and policies to support the reduction of energy use. And finally, the last group of measures we have here, these include codes and advocacy. This includes strengthening energy efficiency codes and other zoning incentives within the city. So I want to highlight next steps really quickly. Just looking ahead in the immediate term, energy and transportation measures will be integrated into the VMT and emissions reduction strategy for climate program grant. Develop community engagement strategy to solicit feedback on measures and emissions reduction strategy. And then a little bit longer term, we'll be looking to engage the broader community around measures and emissions reduction strategies and developing the climate action plan measures and reduction strategies. Engagement timeline, I believe this is one we have shared before, but just pulling back and taking a picture of where we started and where we are going. Again, in January, finalizing our baseline and identifying greenhouse gas and VMT goals. Where we are now is socializing those goals, drafting the strategy, developing the climate action plan reduction strategy, and comp plan integration, looking to adopt the greenhouse gas emissions and VMT reduction strategies in June or July. August and September, that's when we'll be moving into the finalization of the climate action plan reduction strategies. So again, that broader group of strategies looking at not only VMT and residential, but larger categories of sustainability that will fit into the climate action plan, finalizing climate action plan document and socialization for adoption in October and November, and finally looking for a resolution of adopting the climate action plan in December. So with that, want to open it up to questions. We have 4 prompts up here. Just do you have any questions around process, around proposed measures? Do you approve of the proposed measures or support the direction that they are heading? And what questions do you have about the next steps?
All right, thanks, Erin. I'm just going to dive right into questions, and let's start out here on my right. Commissioner Chakrabarti.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, I want to congratulate you on this draft. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for this. It was very detailed. I really liked it. I have just a couple of questions to ask. And this would likely spill into the climate action plan that we are looking at. But I wanted to ask this thing, on your baseline that you have for greenhouse gas emission and vehicle miles traveled, have you considered a nuance for the return from pandemic? Because all data seems to point towards there is a spurt of activity that is probably going to settle down in a while, but we don't know what that is. We don't know if it is people are going to go back into a 5-day work mode or a 3-day work mode or go back into this one. So all those things would affect the vehicle miles traveled and the greenhouse gas emissions data. Have you considered that? That's my first question.
Yeah, to answer your first question, it is something we've been discussing. When we established the baseline, we chose the 2019 baseline, not only because it had some of the best available data, but because it represented those pre-pandemic levels. We didn't want to get a baseline in 2020 or more recent when those vehicle miles traveled are maybe still not settled in and we're not sure where it's going. Considering new patterns, that will be something considered in the measures and considered in the climate action plan, whether that's realizing reduced vehicle miles traveled. It could also mean realizing increased building energy usage with an increase of individuals working from home within the city. So we will be looking at post-pandemic living and commuting patterns and how that may play into our strategies.
Great, thank you. I just want to also give you a disclaimer that all data points towards us going back into pre-pandemic levels. So it's not like we're going to go into a completely different stratosphere from here, but it's great that you have that review and possibility to change on that. My second question, this is my last question. How much has the impact, and I could not get that clearly from it, how much has this impact forecasted considering the ST3 expansion that is coming up until Overlake Transit Center into Redmond? That is probably going to change a number of factors for Sammamish, or is this considering the fact that it's not changing anything within Sammamish, so we don't have to look at that, or are we going to look at that again in a future setup? I could not get that from the information that was given. So if you could elaborate on that, that would be great.
Yeah, so any new transportation developments outside of the city of Sammamish have not been considered at this time. They were not incorporated into the baseline, but it is something we could potentially examine in the future. We look to consistently be improving our data and tracking how it is changing over time to track progress and consider how external factors may be affecting transit ridership or other factors. So it is something that we may look to in the future, although it's not represented in the 2019 baseline.
Got it. Thank you so much, because that is definitely going to come in with Amazon and Microsoft and the transit availability for those major employers from the city. Those were my two questions. Thanks, Chair.
Commissioner Bachman.
First, I want to thank everyone for excellent work, and really want to thank fellow commissioners for their written comments. It was great to have those and fully support those. My first two comments really don't have anything to do with the climate action plan, but were prompted by conversations and your presentations. The first is, as we transition from natural gas to electric, and this might get picked up in other parts of the comp plan, are we going to have the electric infrastructure and capacity, siting substations, transmission lines, and even service to buildings may all need to change? That's a big change. Siting substations is very, very hard. I see Kelly over there nodding her head. So just out there. The second one was prompted by, and I can't remember whose written comment this was, so pardon my ignorance there. The bus pullout, I agreed with the commenters that Metro might not want bus pullouts, but again, not part of the climate action plan, but something missing in our community is bus layover areas. The nearest big one, of course, is Highlands, maybe a little one at South Sammamish Park and Ride, but nothing in the north end. And then to AJ's recent comments about SD3, more buses coming in and out of Sammamish are going to need those layover spots. And again, they're very hard to cite. So moving on to specific things on the Climate Action Plan, perhaps adding more specificity in the citywide commute reduction program regarding carpooling and public transit, bus, rail to local training and meeting opportunities. Very nice rail ride from Seattle to Portland or Vancouver for AWC or other conferences. Either I missed it, and Aaron might have touched on it very briefly, mention of high pollution two-cycle motors, gas motors, like my blower and chainsaw. Transitioning small equipment to battery powered it's coming, but it's still expensive. And another comment, this might not have made through your scoring matrix, city support for low-tech, low-cost energy improvements for income-eligible residents. We have a volunteer home improvement program for eligible, but maybe a little bit of city oomph, a few dollars there for some upgrades. Let's see. Under partnerships in education, and I'm looking at the matrix that was in our packet, it seemed like it went into unnecessary explanation on why reducing diesel particulate matter is needed. Maybe put that in a footnote or shorten that up. I think it's pretty obvious why that's needed. And that's it. That's all I have from comments. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
At least I now know that any hot days this summer I can blame on your leaf blower, John. Commissioner Bosworth.
Thank you. All right, I did send in some comments, but I don't think I CC'd the rest of the commission, so FYI. But I did see them incorporated into the slide where you had them, so thank you for that. I was curious kind of where, the detail in what we were provided was from, and so from the presentation, it sounds like a lot of it is from, was it PSRC's?
It was from K4C's
K4C.
return on carbon tool. Mhm.
Got it. And so I was just curious if it was all from there, or did we add some that was Sammamish specific?
Yeah, so that was the starting point, and then we did add and refine based on the feedback from the different stakeholders we got. So we did edit it and add on it from there.
Got it. Okay, great. And I just wanted to highlight some public comment we got from someone in the community, Vincent. And also I've had conversations with him at Coffee with Council, and it just really got me thinking about, vehicle miles travel and how it's just important, or, there's one school of thought of really separating the bikers and walkers from the vehicles and not having to have them interact in a way that either from safety or really at all, really separating them. And so I just, as I was thinking about this evening, I was thinking about the first time I went to Las Vegas and how I was like, this is super weird. It feels very separated and I didn't like it. But then I realized in the context of really separating the vehicles from the people that are walking or biking was just, really separate them and figuring out how to do that. And that, getting back to what we're talking about tonight, is just an interesting way to really get down the vehicle miles traveled. So as I was reading this, the reason I bring this up also is the measures in here, are they enough? Are they bold enough? Will we actually meet our targets? So just something I want to us to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fayed.
Thank you. First of all, I really appreciate that the city is leading by example. This is really good. And then the fact that you're leading by example, it would be great also if you share that with the community and share the, how this is benefiting this entire initiative and how people can make use of the same in their businesses and then incentivize them to do the same for business owners and other entities as well. The other thing that I would like to point of here is I am a very big believer in education. And I know this is a long-term plan. And we all already have vehicles. I have a gas guzzler car, and some of us have, So I don't know if we're going to be able to do any impact today, even though we could be educated. But those who will make the biggest impact, in my belief, are the youth in our communities, the kids that are in schools. So if we could reach out to the public, to the school boards, and see if we can incorporate some of this education in the curriculum, so as they grow and then they become adults themselves, they are more likely to be more environmentally friendly than us. So I would recommend that we could, we include that in reaching out to schools and then reaching out to the youth as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Safavian?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that the study is very comprehensive and covers a lot of bases. I'm the one that I try to be a little bit more specific and kind of get into the nitty-gritty part of what we can do as far as the CAP measurements. And I strongly believe that those specific measurements, particularly those that can be actually implemented and used by the public, would have much far impact to the community and reaching the CAP goal than those that you have at it. I think that should be really taken that comment seriously. I have some general questions. Question number one, the baseline is 2019.
Yes.
Then from the engineering point, what is the design year? What is the goal year?
So the end year, there is a short-term goal of 2030, and then interim goal of 2040, and end goal of 2050, where you have the 96% reduction.
So we don't have an intermediate goal as far as between 2019 and 2030?
Correct. There's not a year-to-year goal. It's just we plan to track reductions year over year, but don't assign for a specific year because it is hard to track linear reductions when measures may take more than a year to go into effect.
Also, as far as the public, you hear from my fellow commissioners, and I think that we all recognize the importance of engaging with the community at different level. Has there been any attempt to have an open house rather than only relying on a community advisory group? Has there been any thought about that?
Yeah, so at this time we're working with the community advisory group, but there is plans as we move past this initial phase, which is heavily focused on the grant, which has a deadline of June to be wrapping up in June. But after that time, we are looking to open it up to the community with a variety of different sessions that we can get more information on, but we have a calendar of events and reach out opportunities.
I strongly suggest that because it looks like that we have between now and almost to the end of the year as far as engaging with the public. I strongly suggest that you work with the staff and take advantage of all these events that we're going to have, farmers market, project open houses, and things like that, and educate the public. Probably you're going to hear from them and you're going to hear their reaction and maybe educate them. And I think that is a very good opportunity if we can do it.
We do also have a few other events that we're working on right now, and I believe Evan is going to be at the Earth Day event and have a table there, and we'll have an interactive exercise focused around some of the strategies.
4th of July too. As far as the agencies, I saw in your presentation that you contacted the Sammamish Plateau Water District. I happen to be in an area served by Northeast Sammamish, and I didn't see their names. Was there any reason that you did not contact them?
I will have to double check the stakeholder list. Miriam, I don't know if you recall how that was developed.
On the transportation side, you saw again some of the examples of the comments, but I wanted to kind of bring something very important, at least in my mind, that would have substantial impact as far as reaching the CAP goal, and that is the transportation infrastructure. I gave one example in my email. I said perfect example is that a lot of jurisdictions are moving away from intersection signalization and go to roundabout for lots of reasons. Safety, severity of collision is going to be substantial, and these are documented. These are not something new. But more important as far as the CAP goal is that you're going to be reduction of emission, reduction of the pollution, reduction of the delays, and I would highly encourage that. Not only that, I think that we got to be looking seriously as far as the material that we're using, the asphalt versus other treatments that we have. Street illumination, I mentioned it, LEDs. Let's see, what else I have. As far as the transportation, I'm delighted to hear that you guys, you recognize the importance of some of the things, but again, as I mentioned in my email, bus pull-out is that old idea that is not necessarily applicable. It's applicable when you have high-speed arterial and you want to really separate the high-speed traffic from the buses that pull in to pick up a passenger. That is not going to be applicable. We don't have any facility that would work. And based on my own personal experience working for the other jurisdictions, when you talk to the King County Metro drivers, they hate it. They hate it because they have difficulty to pull in and to pull out. So that's I don't think that. Instead, I think that we got to be kind of concentrating on other important things that would encourage people to use the public transportation. As I recall, the city, the only place that you have a bus shelter is as a park and ride. There is no bus shelter that I know of, unless I'm mistaken. There is no bus shelter, and in the kind of weather that we have in here, that is not a thing to encourage people to use it. ADA access, sidewalk access, lighting. These are the things that, in my opinion, that they're really they're more important than concentrating on a commute trip reduction, because if we make it more attractive for the people to use it, hopefully they're going to be using it more. Let's see. I heard about solar system, but that is something that I think that is very important to kind of, and that is a trend that you see all over. A lot of people there, and there's so many programs available. As far as the funding, I didn't see any reference to, and I realized that since your base year was 2019, and back then that bill was not approved by the Congress, infrastructure investment allows the federal government federal government has a lot of money that gives to the local jurisdictions to address some of these measures that we wanted to see it in here, like power stations and the things that we need for the electric vehicles. As far as the public involvement, again, my email cannot get into that much detail. Probably the most important that I think would be not only to attend these events and let the public talk to the staff, but also emails and flyers and brochures and things like that. That would go a long way. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could respond really quick, I just wanted to say all of your feedback, and I know Chair Boffman has some feedback as well, has definitely been noted, and especially the transportation pieces. We do plan on sharing that with our other departments as we're continuing to vet out the strategy. So all feedback will continue to move through that internal review and refinement. So just want to take a moment to say thank you so much, because it's been fantastic. Chair Boffman.
Well, now you make me feel bad for talking about some of the things I put on my written comments. But I'm going to do it anyway because I'm not shy. I did send in some written comments very, very late. I was tardy, so shame on me. But I really just wanted to hit on a couple of highlighted things that I think are important. First, as a general statement, I think that one of the things we need to acknowledge as we interact with people on this topic is, there's some people that are super passionate about it, and there's some skeptics as well. And there are some strategies, and I know this was actually, Aaron, you mentioned it at one point in the presentation about ranking how much greenhouse gas emission potential there really is in some of the strategies. I would just say that I think it's important to acknowledge that there may be some strategies or themes that we have in here where you'd look at it and you'd say, the real net benefit of that particular item, the city's action, may really only result in some fairly marginal improvements or reductions in greenhouse gas emissions over the time period. But it's also important that the city demonstrates leadership, that we fulfill commitments, that we develop a reputation for doing the right thing. So it's there's a tendency sometimes to just say, what are we going to do that's going to have the most effect? And I think that's important, but sometimes we also have to do something that demonstrates to others that they can do something, and then that builds on itself, and that might actually have a bigger impact. I just know I can hear certain voices saying, well, that'll never make any difference anyway, right? And I get that, but sometimes it's a bigger theme than just that, and it's important to kind of acknowledge that. The second item is, I made a few comments about this. I really think that the reporting and monitoring and developing a process to report things on a regular basis will be really critical to make this work. And you have some of those graphs where you're showing carbon emissions, based on PSC's feedback. I would say I think it'd be interesting as a side note with that to track how the electrical mixture between clean energy and dirty electricity changes over time. That might just be a footnote, but I think it would be interesting. But making it not only a reporting mechanism, but also building it into process. So like quarterly reports to the city council, something that demonstrates that it's a priority for the community and for the city, not just a written report that goes on the shelf in a binder every once in a while or something like that. Those kind of things can happen. I think it needs to be reported in a way that is in everybody's face and tracks whether we're succeeding or failing, going in the right direction or the wrong direction. So to me, reporting at a variety of different levels is super important. Another thing that may be slightly contrary to my first comment, I think that there's a tendency in here to always look for a shiny object. Let's go, to solve this problem, all we got to do is go out and buy electric vehicles. But I want to encourage a little bit of caution in the idea that a new thing is always the right solution, because new things have a lot of consequence with embodied carbon. And by the way, the old thing, and it's easy to think about this with vehicles, but it could be equipment on the city hall, it could be a lot of different things. The old things, a lot of times don't just magically disappear, they go to somebody else who then continues to drive them. So now not only are we continuing to emit out of that old thing that we had, or throwing it in a landfill, which isn't helping either, now we also have all the embodied carbon that came from the mining, fabrication, manufacture, transportation, and operation of the new thing. And so it's easy to always look for, especially in the culture that we have, a solution that involves us going and spending money and buying something. But we should also ask ourselves as a test, as a litmus test at each step along the way, whether our idea is making sense from the standpoint of, let's not forget that the things we have are not perfect, but we already have them. We've already invested money, we've already invested the carbon that it took to make that thing, to get that thing here. Let's not throw things away and buy a shiny new object and think that that's the magic solution to our problem. The one last thing is, I think the interesting part about this, if you look at a bunch of the comments and even some of mine, there's a number of things that we could probably do that, and actually really probably most of these things that are kind of two birds with one stone. And one example is if we could, and this is one thing that's changed in my time here in the community, 25 years or whatever. These days, for whatever reason, and my kids are out of high school, and so I can say some of this, but kids now don't ride the bus anymore. I don't know why that is, but everybody drives their kid to school. That's a big problem from an emissions standpoint. If we could get kids back on the bus, I'm not sure that that'll be popular, but if we could figure it out, it would solve some carbon emission and it would improve our transportation situation, and both two birds with one stone. And if you look at these, I think we should also be on the lookout for those things that do that. They accomplish more than one goal, because that emphasizes both a reason and a justification to do it, as well as community support and momentum around those kinds of things. So, you know, multi-prong approach. There's a lot of opportunities here with a lot of the strategies that you guys had in the matrix and the ones that I saw from the other commissioners. And that's it. Let's go back and see who else has anything else they'd like to comment on or questions. Oh, one thing, you have jot form on here. I must have missed that. Is there a way for us to do that, or should we just send any follow-up thoughts to Miriam or Evan, or how should we do this?
I'll go ahead and send out a link after this meeting to
Okay.
the Planning Commission with the form.
Who else would like to add some more?
I just forgot to mention something that I don't know if the other jurisdictions have done it, is have a czar or a point of person. Any comment on that? Do we know any city that they have a point of contact in that city that they're in charge of a program like this? Can you?
Yeah, there are definitely cities who, I'm not sure they call them czars, but they do have program managers, our division managers that lead this work. We're currently recruiting for a sustainability and natural resources coordinator who will be assisting and leading the city in this work once it's adopted at the end of the year. So good news.
That at a city of the population the same size as us, or you're talking about a much larger city?
No, I've actually seen these positions with cities of varying sizes. It depends. But yeah, there are definitely positions out there, and our city council approved a position with the last budget cycle. So we're on track to be very similar to our neighboring cities as well. So it's
That's
good news.
great to hear that.
But is it called czar? I mean, because that.
I'll put a request in with the city manager. I'm not sure we'll get much traction there.
I thought that's
All right, anybody else? AJ?
Yes, one question. To go to your question number 3, does the Planning Commission approve of these proposed measures? What kind of an answer are you looking for?
Yeah, so we know that there's not an actual approval to happen at this time. It's more general speaking of direction, any major objections to the measures that you see up here, but no formal approval needed at this time.
Great, thank you. If you'd not seen that already, we love to read, and so I was wondering if that was a question of if you have read the notes or not. But that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more question. Is the final report is going to have some graphics so we would have a better understanding of? Sometimes, as you know, the chart is so small and it's very difficult to follow. It would be really good to have more graphic material. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
One other thing I did think of is that I think it would be good if we, as we go through and do other things, so for example, development regulations, not the ones tonight, but if we get into more substantive development regulation discussion, we should make sure that this is a bullet point on the agenda or the conversation, because there are a whole litany of things around development that relate to this and almost every other topic. So folding it into our normal everyday process conversation would be important, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I did want to comment on Commissioner Bachmann's initial comments about looking at infrastructure, capital facilities to support. The great thing about doing a policy document like this in the middle of a comp plan update is that we actually can consider those things as part of those chapters or those elements, like capital facilities, transportation, utilities. Yes, adding a policy document like this in the middle of a comp plan update is a lot of work and coordination, but we're able to have those really real-time conversations. And so I think that was a really important point. So that was one last comment I had to add, but thank you again so much for your feedback tonight. This has been very helpful.
Anyone else? Wow, great. Thanks, Aaron.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Okay.
And Chair Boffman, can we ask for about 3 minutes to do a transition between presentations with staff?
How about
Switching
let's
up?
make it 5 minutes?
Okay, you're so
it's
generous. Thank you so
7:35.
much.
It's easy for me to do the math, so let's restart at 7:40. We'll just take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
That's going to happen. Okay, let's go ahead and get back to our next item on the agenda this evening, which is a public hearing to consider some residential development regulations cleanup. So let's go ahead now that everybody's shifted around and get started on that one.
Good evening, Planning Commission, Mr. Chair. My name is Avril Beatty. I'm the current Planning and Permit Center Manager in the Department of Community Development. I haven't had the pleasure of presenting to Planning Commission since I used to ride a Mammoth to work, so I appreciate your patience with me as we get through this item. We are going to be discussing non-substantive amendments to the residential development portions of the municipal code. I'm going to give a little background and I'm going to walk you through this entire thing. If I can get my computer to cooperate. Haha. So about 4 years ago, there was an ordinance 2019-482 that adopted many changes to the residential code. This was in response to large, massive homes, very boxy on small lots, and a lot of the community felt like they didn't really fit into the existing neighborhood fabric. As such, there were these dynamic setback regulations that were adopted. Based on the size of the house, you had to be further away from your property lines. The idea being that if you were to have a massive boxy house, it just couldn't be right up on your neighbor. So that was the intent behind creating dynamic setbacks for the R4 and R6 zone, which a majority of the city of Sammamish is zoned in the residential areas. It included height exceptions for school buildings so that a school wouldn't be limited to a 35-foot height limit. There was also street frontage requirements for newly created lots. This was to prevent the sort of the shoehorning of lots like behind many other lots. Also, the community not feeling like these new developments fit within the fabric of the existing neighborhoods. So these regulations were adopted and put into place effective in May 2019. Then in, I think I have a typo. Ordinance 2021-540 was the massive overhaul to our development regulations. This wasn't just residential setbacks, height, and things. It was the heavy lift that included consolidating regulations from Title 19 clearing and grading regulations, land divisions that used to be in Title 19A, administrative procedures that were in Title 20, environmental review that was also in sections of Title 20, parts of sections of 21A, Development Code of 21A and 21B, which was the town center section of the code. And there was so much that was consolidated, things were added, we got new reasonable use exception regulations put into place. We adopted a floor area ratio, which is living size of a house divided by the size of the lot. Lots and lots of things happened with that ordinance. Because there was so much that needed to be done with that body of work, we didn't get all the honing of regulations, staff didn't get all the honing of regulations that we were hoping for. But we are here in front of you now to try to get some of that honing started. So with the adoption of the code that went into effect, which we now have in the Flipping Book webpage online, we have a residential development standards table that's a little difficult to read. We have lots of regulations that are listed in the footnotes of this table, and a good development standards table will have very, very few footnotes. So these proposed amendments are to reduce those footnotes as much as possible, not changing the regulations, just reorganizing, reformatting, and getting things out of the footnotes that really shouldn't be footnotes. So we're proposing to go from 32 footnotes to 9, which I'm kind of happy we have this proposed surgery done. Additionally, there is a random reference to the King County fee schedule. Please note that there are still sections of our municipal code that have the original 1999 ordinance number from when the city incorporated that had old language from the 1980-something King County regulations. So there's like little fossils of code that still hover around. So as we find them, we're going to try to get rid of them. So there's a strikeout for that one section. So the dynamic setbacks that I was referencing, when you have your handy dandy hard copy printout of the zoning ordinance, or this section of the zoning ordinance, municipal code development regulations. These footnotes 21 and 22 come up every day for planning staff when talking with residents and developers looking to either build new houses or to add on to houses, demo, rebuild houses all the time. And it's been very frustrating for both staff and the public to have to dig through all these footnotes to find these regulations. They're very wordy. They're a little difficult to absorb and comprehend. So part of the proposal is to extract these from the footnotes and add them and basically overhaul the table itself so that it's more user-friendly. And I also want to show you as an example. So this is that table. Oh, can I reduce this? There we go. So this is the table. You will also notice that there's these structure setbacks followed by single detached dwelling setbacks, which are then continued on the next page, then followed by detached accessory dwelling setbacks. And when we try to tell people which rules apply, you go a little cross-eyed trying to follow which one is which. So if you look on, within the packet itself, the drafted table, that starts on page 19 of the packet, we have reorganized those sections so that we have the single family regulations all together. And we have the detached accessory dwelling regulations all together. And other structure setbacks are together so that you get a little less cross-eyed when you're trying to figure out what rules apply to your property. So I just wanted to show you as an example, all of these footnotes we wanted to find a better home for. And for most of them, it was appropriate to find them a new home. So this is an example showing how the regulations regarding lots that need to have street frontage, that was appropriate to have in the neighborhood design standards, which is in a different section of the code. And that neighborhood design standards applies to all residential development. So it's not like someone could miss having that applied. And with these proposed changes, we will be updating all of our public information handouts so that there's proper cross-referencing to all applicable regulations, because we don't want to miss it. We don't want applicants to miss it. We want to make sure everyone's fully informed. So as an example, we have things that are design-oriented that we want to move to the neighborhood design standards. We have other things that are more development standards, where there's a whole section of code within the residential chapter. So in this 21.04.030 district standards, we have many sections that refer to density, building height, and setbacks. And this is very normal for development regulations. You have your table with basic setbacks, and then you have these sections that give further descriptions and explanations of allowed exceptions or other standards that apply. There's often regulations for things that are allowed to encroach within setbacks: chimneys, air conditioning units, bay windows, things like that. And it's appropriate to have these sort of sections after the table to list what the exceptions are. So, bear with me. So we're trying to demonstrate that we weren't going to lose anything. And we weren't looking to change any of the regulations. We're just looking to have some clarifying language and some reorganization so it's easier for everyone to find and to understand and to convey to the public. There was a question from Mary Wichter, I'm sorry, jumping ahead a little bit, regarding some of the design standards. We aren't looking to change the regulations. We're not opening up that as a policy window. We're just looking at formatting. So we're not thinking about, is this code, is the regulation itself any good? We're not looking at content. We're just looking at the organization of it. And all illustrative diagrams would remain within the code. We don't want to get rid of pictures. We like pictures. So some of the clarifying language that we wanted to clean up includes in footnote 24, there's a reference to side yard setbacks where the table has 5 feet, but then this says if you're adjacent to one of these zoning districts, you have to be 10 feet away. And so you go from thinking you have 5 feet for a setback, but then you have to read through and, oh no, you have a larger setback than you originally thought. Best practice is to have it the other way around. So you list what the minimum should be, and then you list more flexible exceptions after that. So you start off, so your baseline should be the more restrictive regulation. So this is not a change to the regulation. This is just trying to describe it better and be more user-friendly about it. There were some, like note 25, very wordy. So just taking out language that feels redundant, that we don't really need, keep it to the minimum to express what the regulation is. We also have some, when we try to explain to people what the height measurements are, we get a lot of questions like, well, what are these options? Oh, those are not options. It's really just referencing a subsection. So again, we're not looking to change the regulations. We just want to use more plain English in explaining what the regulation is, trying to say the front line to the rear of the structure and the starting point, that it reads really odd. So the yellow parts, what we want to get rid of, it felt easier to say 12 feet from the front, from the wall of the building closest to the front property line, because not everything is orthogonal. Not everything is going to be parallel to an obvious front property line. So we were trying to kind of better explain what the intent was there. So we got a couple of public comments. There was one from a developer asking about the street frontage regulation and the minimum lot width along that frontage. He was concerned it was going to be more restrictive. I said, this already exists. This already applies to you. I didn't hear anything back after that. Mary Wichter had expressed concerns about the stormwater regulations and the building height illustrations. And again, these aren't to change any of these. These don't allow any more impervious surface. They don't allow any more pervious surface. It's the same rules. We want to keep all of our pictures, and we're not looking to make any policy changes at all whatsoever. So if you look at your packet, I just wanted to make sure we've got it clearly expressed that staff was very deliberate in going through every single footnote, making sure it had a new home, or figuring out where it could be better incorporated where it was. So if you look on page 19 of your packet, which is the beginning of the edits, and I appreciate your patience with this. When I was doing this work, the idea was, let's see what we want to end up with. And I didn't think through having a full strike-through version. But we're going to go through this just so that I want to make sure. My goal is to give you so much information that you couldn't possibly have a question at the end of this. You're going to be so sick of me talking. So on page 18, under the design standards, so this is all under that 21.02.030 neighborhood design standards. And so then these are the applicable various subsection within that part of the code. So where it says for residential development, the minimum of 1 tree, that is currently footnote 30. For lots created in the R1, R4, R6 zoning districts oriented with the average street frontage along a public street, that's existing as note 5. Under lot segregations, clustered development, we already had a whole section on clustered development, but footnote 12 had more information about clustering development. So that needed to be with its friends in this subsection. In subsection O, we have streets and connections. That was a prime location to relocate footnote 29 that talks about that front door entry. Since it's an interface, it's a design regulation that interfaces the house with the street, with the front door, with its walkway. And then under 21.04.030, we just want to add a reference to remind everybody that these other sections of code apply. Not legally required, but very appreciated when a normal person is trying to wrap their head around these regulations. And then the table, this would replace the existing table that you have in your handy dandy hard copy residential zones table from subsection C in 21.04.030. And I'm hoping we can keep a little bit of color coding. It doesn't have to be these colors necessarily. Looking at you, Kelly. But the idea is that we would clump together applicable regulations. So if someone just wants to understand density, they can easily find that section in the table. If they just want to understand floor area ratio or other like site regulations like impervious surface coverage, it's all together. We actually have quite a few different regulations on driveways, but they were all over the place. They're clumped together. And then the single family detached dwelling setbacks is a nice big section. We have those dynamic setbacks put in there. We have the different housing sizes laid out in their own rows. trying to make it as easy as possible to understand and minimize the brain damage. Separating out the detached accessory dwellings, all other structure setbacks that are in there, having all the height maximums together instead of one line of height maximums and then a footnote somewhere else. And that just left us with 9 footnotes. And these were generally the right types of footnotes that a table would have, where you might need to reference another section of code, or you just need to specify what that regulation applies to. So this felt more reasonable for having footnotes instead of having pages and pages. It's only half a page. So building height measurements, I already gave you that overview. Setback modifications, whole section already on setback modifications, so putting in the reduction to rear and side yard setbacks, no change to the code itself, just copying and pasting it to a more appropriate location. The height exception to limits already had a section, but we had 3 footnotes referring to height exceptions. Wanted to consolidate that. And then I noticed that we had so many footnotes regarding impervious surface regulations. And they weren't even all together in the footnotes. They're all spread out. So it made sense to have a new subsection, put them all together. It's consolidated. You can see it all at once. In my attempt to make no change to content, it does read a little odd. And if you guys have any feedback, I would love to hear some. The code itself currently, so this is, if you look at footnote 3 of the existing table, there is a reference that says applies to each individual lot, impervious surface area standards for A, regional uses, B, non-residential uses, C, lot may be increased beyond total amount permitted in this chapter, subject to approval of a conditional use permit. So this applies to the maximum impervious surface percentage, which, even though I already noted it, it's on the second page towards the bottom of the table, 3rd row from the bottom. It is so difficult to find these footnotes when you're trying to go back to the table to see what it's referring to. So in the 4 years that I've been with the city of Sammamish, I've never had to utilize this footnote. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value. I just haven't found that value yet, but I was trying to not change the language because I don't want to change the regulation. That's why that wording is a little odd, but feedback would be helpful. If you have any, love to hear it. And then beyond that, one of the larger footnotes, number 8, is all about in an R1 zone, how you would meet impervious surface standards. And then there's another big footnote, number 28, that talks about impervious surface limitations for school and government uses. So all of those are now together. And then one thing that was interesting, okay, it's all interesting to me, I kind of geek out on this stuff, is that note 17 defined yard. We have a whole chapter of definitions, and yet this little definition was all by itself in the footnotes. So that's getting proposed for migration to the definitions chapter. And then that last page is just striking out that archaic reference to the King County fee schedule. So, please let me know what questions you have.
Can I go first?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, because I need to step out. First of all, thank you very much for sharing all of this with us. The one feedback that I have, or not feedback, is basically you are the expert in this field. And to me, from my perspective, as long as no code has been changed, and as long as it's making your life easier, and the I would say customer, the folks who are actually dealing with this, the developers or the homeowners, making their life easier so they can digest this information better, that's definitely a plus. I mean, I do applaud you guys for doing this to make things easier. I am not an expert to give you feedback if this is the right thing or not, but you guys eat and drink this stuff every day, so you know better than we do. So I see that there's nothing but plus to this effort, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Does anybody else have questions? Go ahead, AJ.
I was really wanting to ask, why did you change structures to buildings? Because building has a connotation which is not with structures, and couldn't that create? I might be talking harshly about this. Couldn't that create a loophole that we don't intend to have?
That is an excellent point, and I wholeheartedly agree that buildings and structures are two different things. Could you please let me know which page?
I'll take that offline with you. I have to find that out.
Okay.
I might waste time in this process. But you know my question, and I just want to try to see that we don't have a loophole over there, because that's the first thing that came to mind.
John, did you have something?
Yeah, anything you can do to simplify the incredibly complex process is much appreciated. You mentioned your handouts, and you're going to update the public handouts, tip sheets to go with this. Great work. Thanks.
Go ahead. Carrie, you go first.
Sure. Thank you so much. I have crawled through all of this in the fall time. I'm on my HOA. We had some things we were working through, and so I was crawling through this backwards and forwards, including the spec sheets. Those are actually very helpful. Those are the PDFs that simplify it. So definitely, let's do those too. So I didn't entirely understand the updates in the packet prior, but now it makes total sense. So I don't have any immediate feedback, but thank you for the work.
Syed, go ahead.
Couple of general questions. Question number one, isn't it kind of premature to go through this process? Isn't it going to be a part of the comp plan and get into the possibly nitty-gritty part of that?
That's an excellent question. We did think about that, but the comp plan update takes time, and then subsequent code amendments to implement the comprehensive plan take more time. And the planners, my team, like, it's every day that we are like suffering through trying to explain these regulations. So even this effort, even if it saved us 6 months, it'll be more than that, is worth it, because it's every day trying to help people and feeling frustrated. Like I know in the packet it says like no fiscal impact, but like this is priceless for my team and for the public. And so we're willing to take whatever gains we can get from it.
So you guys, you would not be upset if through the comprehensive process we decided to make some changes into that?
Absolutely not. I would only hope, this might sound odd, I hope that this wouldn't prevent anyone from trying to come up with even more changes in the future. Like, these are all, a lot of times planners are asked if you're a long-range planner versus a current planner doing current planning work. I am a current planner through and through. I love the policy work and the community visioning and all of that happens with a comprehensive plan, but helping see things get implemented and seeing things get built and a community evolve and grow, that's that's my jam. So all the code changes that need to happen to implement the comprehensive plan, I am all for it.
Also, I printed out before seeing your handout today, I printed out what it was actually on the city website, and the form and the matrix look a little bit different. The one that I'm looking at it, that I printed out, it says Residential Development Regulation Cleanup. That's the title. But then the table that you gave us looks a little bit different. Is there any reason for it?
Are you referring to the handout?
Well, the one that I have is this way. It's a portrait, and this is landscape. I mean, they're not the same. They're not
Correct,
the same.
correct. So the landscape one, that's the existing.
I see.
And it's done in a fancy software program that I don't have access to, or I don't know. I used Word. I didn't use the fancy program, so it made it much easier just to put it in a portrait format than try to make the orientation match.
Also, in your presentation, one of the slides color-coded, the green and yellow.
Yes.
Part of the statement's underlined, part of it is not. Can you explain what is underlined? What is that for?
Let me go back to that slide.
Yes. You see that? Look at 2A. On any lot where the existing grade so-and-so, and then there's a part of that statement is underlined. What does that mean?
So the underlining is the new words added. I highlighted the entirety of that section because I wanted to be able to demonstrate how it would actually read, because there's these like snips and cuts and adds throughout this sentence. I just felt like it would portray the intent behind that proposed amendment a little clearer.
Also on these charts, regardless of existing or not, I know that's not a part of the cleanup, but I'm just curious. If I look at the columns and they're blank, there is no number, what does that mean? Let's look at one, what would be a good example? You look at the handout, and then you look at R12, maximum residential floor area ratio. For R12 stays blank. What does that mean?
So anytime that there's a blank field in a table, a development standards table, it means that there's no regulation that applies. And then it's basically a design choice by that jurisdiction if they leave it blank, if they put a dash, if they put an X, if they put a not applicable.
And now taken for center and dumped in by
Gremlins.
Wait a minute, was that the Kraken?
So given how much there are regulations, as part of this proposal, the design choice was just to leave it blank. We could add a disclaimer, or not a disclaimer, but we could add a reference that any blank field means that there's not an applicable regulation.
You talk about, you extensively talk about a setback. And I saw in one of these charts that the city has setback, but it looks like the setback is not really, doesn't recognize the functional classification of roadway that this property is abutting. I think that I saw a reference to the arterial street there. I didn't see any reference to the collective residential street. Don't you think that a setback should be related to the functional roadway that serves that parcel?
So the current regulations only have a different front setback if it's along specifically an arterial roadway.
What happened to the collective street?
We haven't had one.
We have a lot of
It's just
collective
the
streets.
standard. It's just the standard front setbacks that would apply, and then in which case it would be the home size then would dictate whether the house is 15, 20, or 25 feet away in the R4 zone.
So if I'm a developer and I have a parcel along the street that is officially designated by the city as a collective street, how are you going to give me the information and setback? You're going to apply the arterial, you apply the residential?
If it's listed on the city's street map in the comprehensive plan as an arterial, that's where the designation is made. And so
So if it is not arterial, then
then the standard front setbacks would apply.
so that is in conflict with the function classification roadway that that the city has on our official
The
system.
city's never
I'm sorry,
decided.
can I just intervene and kind of suggest, is this really a topic of
No, no, no,
the
because
corrections,
we're going
or is
through
this a
that.
topic of the development regulations? Because I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about arguing over development regulations.
Well, and that could be something that could be brought up as part of the
Yeah.
comprehensive plan.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so, Avril, I want to tell you that I was involved in Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the development regulations, so this feels a little bit like a teacher correcting my work a little bit, although I'll blame David for most of it. You've convinced me that this is all just corrections. I guess the one question is, there's lots of times then this stuff gets referenced in all kinds of different places. That would be my one kind of hesitation, is to really be absolutely certain that all of those references, because when you change numbers, and right, you know that better than I do, but I do feel like there is a potential to create additional issues if all of the referencing throughout the rest of the code and ordinance is not carefully checked.
I am generally the one who creates all of the public information handouts. So that was part of a discussion with the team about, like, we can propose this, we can draft it up, we can bring it forward, but understanding that that's part of the work that we are inflicting on ourselves, is having to update not only the informational brochure handouts that we have, but our applications, other parts of the website. So we are keeping a list of all the things that will need to be updated, and it might take a few weeks to get through everything, but we are willing to do it.
Yeah, and then we will be doing the Phase 3 development code regulations on the, I think, fairly near future, so we're going to change it all on you anyway.
Job security.
All right, anyone else? Okay, so this is a public hearing and a recommendation to the council. So I will go ahead and open the public hearing on the residential development regulations cleanup. Are there any public comments on this particular topic? And these are 7 minutes per person, correct? Yeah. Yep.
Hello, planning commissioners. It's Paul Stickney Sammamish. I won't need anywhere near all that time. I approve of all this. I will admit something in advance. I haven't gone on to see the city informational pieces that are available, but I was involved in, as Commissioner Boffman said, I was heavily involved in following development regs 1 and 2, and for a whole lot, before that. And one comment I talked about, and if it already exists, cool, but if not, this is an opportunity. I'd like to see some sort of a table or chart that tells somebody if they're doing a major remodel, to what degree do these things apply, or if it's a minor remodel, or if there's major damage to a house with a fire or earthquake, or if there's just a little bit of damage, like a tree falls on part of a roof, or if someone's doing a kitchen remodel that doesn't involve plumbing, where's their involvement? There's a lot of things people do routinely. Are those topics easy to identify and have some a general guidance as to what percentage or amount of the development regulations apply based on the scope and scale? Obviously, if somebody tears a house down and starts over, everything applies. But I'm just curious if there's some fairly simple things. Somebody wants to do a new roof. Someone wants to do a deck. Someone wants to put in a fire pit. Someone wants to put a storage building outside. Are these common things that come up? Add outdoor entertainment area. Are these things sort of in a place that they don't all have to be there, but I suppose the thing I'm really asking about is can somebody gauge how much of these rules apply to different scales of work they're going to do? Could that be a part of this or not? The other thing I would add that is coming up, which it's too early to do now, but as the land use things happen and missing middle housing and House Bills 1220 probably, or 1110, I'm sorry, on top of what was discussed tonight about development regs phase 3, odds are some of these things will change as those things come on, but that's not the topic tonight. So in general, I think this is real good. I'm just curious if there's a place in these regulations or in this format that you have tonight that, you know, what if I want to type things, do these things, how much applies? How simple is it for somebody to understand? Now, one could always say, go hire a contractor, go hire an expert, but if somebody is getting online themselves, is there sort of a simpler matrix that could help guide them to what degree these would apply to them or not? So that's my comment. Appreciate the chance to speak.
Thanks, Paul. Julian, do we have anybody virtually?
Yes, we have one hand raised. Ms. Wichter, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Hey, third time's a charm, finally joined. Had to click, thank you, Julian. Mary Wichter here, Sammamish for 22 years. First of all, I think what Paul Stickney had just asked about, I think if anybody's interested in doing something, if you're not sure if you need a permit, you do a project guidance, which gives a feasibility, and then they'll tell you the code that applies. I know Avril Beatty and her staff had done a couple short videos that said when you need a permit for types things, like if you're building a pergola in your yard, or if you're buying a shed at Costco and putting it in, it'd cover those things. I don't know where those things are since the new website reorg thing, but I think those things are very useful. And I think also under a redevelopment application, I think a lot of times it's restricted to the amount you're spending on it or the value on it. And I don't know if that needs to get changed, but I think those were great questions. And in general, really appreciative what Avril's and her Beatty and her staff have been doing. I am a computer scientist, computer programmer by education and by my first decade of experience. And rewriting existing code that has problems while you're developing it, while you're using it, is very hard to do and time consuming, but it's super important. And I totally 120% understand her usability. It is a real drag to go in those tables and then read the footnotes and then try to wrangle them out. So I think what she's done, now that I understand it better, thank you for that explanation. And thank you for taking your mammoth on my instantaneous email and putting my comments in your presentation tonight. That was very well done. I guess the couple concerns I have has been expressed by some of the other people. As we go through this, like right now, the text amendment docket requests are turned off. So if there's a problem with the code, you can't actually request them. So I think as we go through this cleanup process with this, which I hope will get looked at and get cleaned up, make sure it's really good, so it can be used sooner than later and hopefully really soon. I think there needs to be a bucket for, this little thing needs to get looked at, and this little, because otherwise you can't get those little things fixed, and then we end up living with them for 2-3 years. The comp plan does have to get done by the end of 2024, and Director David Pyle has very clearly stated that whatever development code is necessary to support that also has to be adopted by the same date. So we're going to be running to that finish line with many things in hand. So I think if this could get done earlier, that's fine. And then if the cleanup things could get popped into the development regs phase 3, which I think are supposed to be part of the work done for the end of 2024, I think that would be good. I do understand that the footnotes are weird and sometimes they're not used and sometimes they don't match up, but like just because I do stormwater all the time, when I saw X was a new section, I was like, where'd these come from? And then I saw that they were scattered. And then just the way they read it almost makes it sound like someone could just do a conditional use permit and not have impervious surface apply to them, which I think would be a really bad loophole. So maybe there's a way to reorder that in the way the footnotes are or something or other, or I don't know how to fix that one. I just know that it reads as an error. So like whatever it was before, you had scattered pieces, you're trying to collect the pieces, and then the pieces need to have a comparence to them or fix. Like where it says regional, I was like, regional what? Is that regional stormwater, regional access lake, regional features? So since it's been pulled from the rest of the table, it doesn't refer back to the things it was in the table with. So it looks a little bit odd on its own. So I do think you might have to do a little wordsmithing there to just increase your understandability, because the worst thing to do would be spend all this time and design and try to put them in where they are and then create more confusion from that. Also, when you're doing this type of thing, just like we went from Sammamish Municipal Code to Sammamish Development Code, but still kept the municipal code in many cases, I think if we're renumbering, there needs to be an explanation or footnote or somewhere that's very readable when you go into the flipping book that says, hey, these tables were changed at this period or whatever, just so if you looked at something 3 months before and you look at it 3 months later, you kind of get what went on. So I think that's super essential. Otherwise, I'm totally for it. I think the question about the blank fields was also excellent. And I think as people understand this more and as it goes to City Commission, that those things can be either put in the packet or put in the presentation to explain it better. And then just, I didn't really have anything else because I didn't have enough time to be able to go through all the footnotes and find them. But it is really hard to find stuff that goes together on the website. So like the planning department, or the permitting department, where they say when you need a permit, how you get to the code, how you get to the regulations, how the municipal code works with the flipping book. That needs to be streamlined a little bit. Otherwise, I think you're going to see people that maybe are actually sophisticated doing development or doing remodels. They come to the city's code, the website's been redone, and you don't know what you're looking for, so you don't know what you're missing. And I've had that trouble since the end of February. And I do love the new website and the organization of it, but I just think it's really hard to get those little pieces and know what you're looking for and piece them together. Kind of, we're doing the broader thing like Avril's staff is doing internally, and I think it just needs to come together a little bit more. So I don't know if people can like test the website to look up things and get the links fixed and have them in the right pieces with the right paragraph ahead of things that explains it. I think just a little bit of work there would be good. I don't think it's hard to do. I just think it's like a usability interface thing for knowing users, for unknowing users, and for people that might need it periodically. So I hope that helps. I'm reachable if anything I said doesn't make any sense and you want some feedback. I'm a reader of the code, not necessarily a user of the code, but I've definitely seen where stormwater holes definitely cause problems in areas. So I'd like to have those removed if at all possible, or cleaned up, or reordered in how they are so that they do make sense. Otherwise, I yield the rest of my time. Thanks for the public hearing, and really appreciate all the effort, work, and the usability of the code is of utmost importance.
Thank you, Ms. Wichter, and we have no more hands raised.
Great. Before we go on, could somebody move to extend the meeting, pick an amount?
Move to extend the meeting to 8:40.
Second.
We got to do public comment. How about we do 8:50?
I accept the friendly amendment.
All right, second? I'll second it. So it's been moved and seconded to extend to 8:50. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay. No more public comment. Let's close the public hearing. All right, so let's start out with a motion. Does anyone feel like they want to make a motion?
Happy to do that. I move to recommend to the City Council the proposed non-substantive amendments, including additional non-substantive edits that might have been received tonight, to Sammamish Municipal Code 21.02.030, Neighborhood Design Standards, Sammamish Municipal Code 21.040.030, District Standards, Density and Dimensions, Sammamish Municipal Code 21.04.040, Technical Terms and Land Use Definitions, and Sammamish Municipal Code 21.09.060, Development Permit Fees as presented by staff and described in Exhibit 1.
So moved.
Was there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. I'm not going to read the whole thing, that we recommend this to the city council. Any discussion or conversation? My one comment is, I think that Paul's suggestion in his public comment was a good one, that we should not do now, but put on the list for development regulations phase 3 to think about how to direct people who are in a non-typical situation. We've talked about that some in the past. It comes up repeatedly. It will be challenging to do because there's so many variables that you can't nail it down to a simple, but I do think that there are some instances where that would be a good development regulations phase 3 thing. So not with this, but let's keep it on the parking lot board for that exercise. That was my only comment. Anyone else? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we recommend this to the city council. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Great, that passes, and we're recommending that to the city council. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, let's move on and do agenda-related public comment, which at this point is any public comments on the draft greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled reduction strategies. Do we have public comment on that topic, which was the only thing on the agenda that we didn't already technically do public comment on? Mr. Stickney, go ahead.
I got it short. Hello, Planning Commissioners. It's Paul Stickney, Sammamish. One tie between the two agenda items, I can't help it in my mind, but Avril made a good comment about fossil code, and it made me think of fossil fuels in your first part of this, but that was tied together. A serious comment, but I'm going to piggyback on what Mark Boffman talked about maybe not taking something shiny and, replacing it with something new just for something new instead of keeping what you had old. I'm not sure this is 100% right, but I'm going to bring up a topic that I think matters for some people in the community. I think there'll be a fair amount of support for weaning off of gas furnaces. A question I have, though, is hot water. There's a lot of instant hot water heaters that are very poor with an electric element at this time. So the question is, are people going to be willing to make that trade-off for the Insta-Hot gas hot water heaters? I'm not going to come down on a policy side. I just tossed that out there. A couple other things. What about a gas fireplace that uses very little gas, not that often, but it's a good look and people like it as opposed to a electric one? What about a gas grill outside? What about a gas dryer? So as we're going through this, what I'm asking is, how far do we go with the elimination of gas, or does the community want to try just to say none anywhere? So I just toss that out there as an either or combination. I agree with Carrie Bosworth's comments about separation to keep cars off the roads and to have people feel safer and more people walk and do multimodal transportation. Sammamish, that would be a great topic for the Transportation Master Plan as we get land use evaluated and hopefully come to community direction on during the comp plan process. those comments are great. And a couple side notes with some humor, and if Don Jaron were here, he would tell you the story. He's the one that advocated for the 12-foot sidewalks on 228th. And there's been a few issues with them, kids riding bikes and cars coming out and mixing in. And East Lake Sammamish Parkway has had issues with concurrency and whether there should be credit for people who walk or ride bikes or use the trail. I think that is appropriate. So to circle back to that, I think if we had really inviting trail systems and alternate paths that do tend to separate cars from other modes of transportation, we would get people more, I don't know the right word, they'd just be happier to consider using those other means without it being unsafe. So I just had a couple comments about that. But overall, good job on consultants, staff tonight on both sets of the presentations. Lots of good information, and appreciate the opportunity just to chime in a bit. All right, have a good evening.
Thanks, Paul. Julian, do we have a virtual commentator?
Yes, we have one hand raised. Ms. Wichter, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Hi, Mary Wichter again from Sammamish. I actually thought the presentation was very comprehensive, extremely well done, thought out, laid out, and connected. I thought all the information that Brightworks presented and that the Planning Commission responded to was really terrific. So thank you for all of that. I'm sort of on the side of, I think the more that you can get education to people about what's important and what they can do, and if it's an everyday thing or an every week thing, then they think about it more, and then that kind of goes in their family, particularly if you get the kids involved. So an example is like recycling. If you know that you're supposed to recycle and how to recycle and do it better, then you're doing less things that hurt other people's recycling. If you understand that food waste is actually a huge problem for biomethane that gets created from it, then maybe you learn to do that differently and you don't put it in your garbage. You make sure that it gets green recycled like it's supposed to be, and we work on ways for that. If I'm a person that used to drive around a lot because I had 2 kids, I don't anymore because I've been working from home, and I already have a hybrid vehicle. Maybe if I get an EV vehicle, maybe the power I get from Puget Power isn't as clean as maybe one would think it is. So maybe it would be better if I don't do the EV first because I have limited money, and maybe I should do a furnace instead of a forced air furnace, gas furnace. I should go to a heat pump. So I have a combination where I could have air conditioning and heat, and it could be used electric. Now the problem with furnaces that are gas is usually they last about 20 years. So if you're ready to replace one, you're good. But if you just replaced one a few years ago or 10 years ago, you're not going to be changing it. So that, like, what do you add in? And I guess the thing I'd like the city to know, it's hard because we have very little staff, too much to do all the time, but we do have some good consultants, is like Puget Sound Energy, I believe, serves everybody in the whole city of Sammamish. And if we could get some numbers on how clean or green their power energy is, then we would know, yeah, it's fine. Or if they're getting it from non-green sources, then switching a lot of stuff to electrification doesn't actually help. And instead of like one person doing that or somebody from an area, I think if it could be done with the utility talking with the city or give them an action item or something or other, that would be worthwhile. And then it could be communicated to people through the website, through social media, through a newsletter and things like that. And I just think anytime we can do things like was mentioned by the Chair Boffman, that people aren't having their kids ride the school bus anymore. Well, before COVID, I hope that people were, and since it's really past COVID now, people really need to do that. And if they're not doing that, there's a lot of areas in the city that if parents walked with the kids, or if the kids walked in a group, or if the older kids walked the younger kids to school, I think there could be a lot more walking to school. Schools usually only do a walk to school week once a year, and then they try to, get people up. But I think if it happened more and more often, you would find you'd get socialization between the older students and the younger students, you'd have socialization between more diverse people. It would be more inclusive and people would feel like they belong. So I think we can get a lot of things going. And then just the more that people are aware about every little thing that they do, you know, with all the people that we have on Earth and all the people that live in our area, that it does make an impact. So I think, like Wasim said, you know, education is number one. If people understand what they can do to help, if they understand the impact it would have, if they do have to spend money on things to change out cars or change out things in the house, what are the most effective for, you know, cost efficiency for the house and for the utility, and does it really help everybody overall? So those are the things I can think of. I don't need to go longer. On the JOT form, those are usually great and they're easy to use, but if people have a longer or like picture input or something or other, maybe you could put up a way that that could be emailed to somebody so it could be received other than just the JOT form, which is usually just a text entry. Otherwise, I thought it was a really excellent meeting. Thanks for all the work being done, and thanks for listening to me and to the last.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wichter, and we have no more hands raised.
Great, okay. Anything else from staff before we adjourn? No, just a reminder to everybody, we are together again in 2 weeks. And then the second meeting in May is canceled in lieu of the training that we're doing. So please pay attention to your calendars. And I believe that's it for this evening. Would someone move to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening. Go Kraken.